Hi, I'm James McGuire, editor of Datamation, and our topic today is the Cloud Adopters Toolkit, the tools you need to manage your cloud deployment. To talk about that, we've got Sharon Wagner, CEO of Cloudin. Sharon, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you very much.
Hey, Sharon, can you give us the sort of the shortened elevator pitch of what Cloudin does? I'm not sure that everyone knows Cloudin. Just what do you folks do?
So we help cloud customers to optimize the way they are using their cloud resources. We look at the use pattern of the way how your application has been deployed and operate in the cloud, and we're looking for areas of inefficiencies. We then provide actionable recommendations that helps you reduce your cost and improve your performance in the same time. We support public cloud and private clouds as well. We actually monitor around 8% of the Amazon capacity worldwide as we speak.
Aha, interesting. Okay. Also with us is Pete Johnson, the Senior Director of Product Marketing at Clicker. Hello to you, Pete.
Hey, James. Thanks for having me today.
Can you give us the same elevator pitch? I'm not sure everyone knows Clicker. What do you folks do?
So Clicker does application-centric cloud management. So we take an application-centric view of how you deploy your applications on different clouds. So we kind of, instead of thinking the sun revolves around the earth, we think the earth revolves around the sun, so to speak. So you define your application using something we call an application profile once. What are the infrastructure needs of your application? And then we take that cloud agnostic description that you provide, and we translate that into best practices on various public clouds, so AWS, Google, Azure, Rackspace, NHP, and we can deploy applications on the three most popular private clouds: VMware, OpenStack, and CloudStack.
Okay, great. Also with us today is Paul Burns, president of Neovise, a cloud research and analyst consultancy. Am I getting it right on Neovise, Paul? In other words, you're a pundit, if I'm correct here.
Yeah, you're right, James. You have it exactly right. We do research in the cloud computing space focused on infrastructure as a service, and then we end up doing research reports, white papers, case studies, and that sort of thing.
Great. And also with us is Greg Lord, Senior Marketing Manager for Akamai Technologies. Of course, Akamai is a pretty well-known company. It runs since the late 90s, but since everyone else got a chance to give their sentence, Greg, why don't you go ahead, too?
Sure. Thanks, James. Appreciate the opportunity to be here today. So as you said, Akamai has been around really since around 1998, and we started with really creating the category of CDN through caching of static content. But since then, the business has evolved quite a bit, and the part of the business that I'm responsible for is our family of cloud-based application delivery platforms. So that's really a service that allows folks who are delivering applications, whether those are on-premise applications or more increasingly applications delivered from various flavors of public cloud. It allows them to overcome the challenges and the realities of what it means to deliver those applications over the internet. And so really our mantra today at Akamai is that we make the internet fast, reliable, and secure, and increasingly a big part of our business is supporting customers who are leveraging the cloud make that happen.
Great. All right, so the Cloud Adopters Toolkit. I mean, I know each of the four of you talk to cloud customers a lot. I mean, as you talk to folks getting on board with cloud computing, what's the biggest frustration? What's the biggest hang-up that people are dealing with in terms of their tools? You know, a company goes out and they purchases a infrastructure as a service deployment. You know, it doesn't solve all their problems. You know, what's a big thing they're running into right off the bat? Paul, what do you see out there in the field?
Okay, sure. I know we've got a great set of panelists today, and I know they're each going to give us some good points. I'll give you one that's fairly broad, but it's kind of the overall topic of management. You know, people go and get their infrastructure as a service cloud, and not everything they necessarily need to run it and manage it and monitor it is built in. So we're going to hear about some great tools from the other folks. But I think the one that I see missing tends to be the ability to manage multiple clouds, the ability to manage not only multiple clouds but multiple types, so public, private, and hybrid, and the ability to integrate your existing on-premises IT with your clouds. And again, that's multiple. So it's this whole concept of having management tools, and again, that's managing the infrastructure, managing the applications, managing patches, getting performance insights, doing capacity management, spending management, all these different things, having these management capabilities so that they work in your cloud and your existing environment.
Mm-hmm. Sharon, what do you see hanging people up about the cloud deployments? What sort of problems do people most run into?
So it's pretty much in line with what Paul already said.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge that we see is everything related to predictability in cost, consumption, and the visibility of how fast and how agile could you be when you migrate your application to the cloud, specifically in hybrid cloud deployment. We've started with Amazon Web Services back in 2012. We then grew up and support the Amazon tools and then Google, but then we've started hearing from our clients, which are mainly enterprises and mature SaaS companies that are looking for solutions to manage their hybrid cloud deployments. Specifically, fast-growing OpenStack distribution, but not only OpenStack, but also VMware, to have an holistic view that allows you to have a multidimensional view of your the different key performance indicators that are cost, performance, other. Could be also, by the way, compliance, SLA, business continuity, and disaster recovery.
You talked about predictability. I think that people run into that. I mean, on an on-demand situation, their bill may or may not be the same every month. Do you see people panicking like, oh, suddenly our bill is X amount higher than it was three months ago? What's going on? It didn't used to be this way.
So yeah, so billing is one aspect. I would actually go a few steps back. When you look at public cloud in general, everything related to consumption in public cloud is represented in the end of the month bill. It could be the over provisioning that you do by mistake or intentionally, but also issues or inefficiencies that you have with your applications that is running on the cloud, because performance issues are typically mitigated by additional capacity. So if you want to have one single common figure or an indicator that will tell you whether you have an issue or inefficiencies in your clouds, public or private, you better look at the cost first.
Mm-hmm. Pete, what do you see hanging people up the most? What's the most frustrating for people when they deploy to the cloud?
I think the biggest thing is knowing where to get started and knowing how best to take advantage of private or public cloud that best suits your needs. It's similar enough to what we used to have in the bare metal data center hosted model that people think it's the same, but it's very, very different. Sharon just mentioned things like either accidentally or intentionally over provisioning, and you get additional costs. You mentioned things like, hey, my bill's not the same every month. Mm-hmm. It's a very different mindset to take advantage of cloud, but the benefits you get at the end of the day are pretty significant. And I think it's those sorts of things that if you think of like market maturity, I think we're just now sort of beginning to cross the chasm with cloud computing. I think it's much earlier than a lot of people think it is. A lot of people would say, Amazon's won, the thing is over. But I think we're early enough in the stage of this that's not true, because so many other people still haven't adopted it. Last fall, in November, December, I had the surreal experience of being at Amazon reInvent at the Sands Expo Center there in
right.
attached to the Venetian, and then 2 weeks later I was at Gartner Data Center in the exact same building.
Right.
And the different mindsets were palpable between those two audiences. The folks in the first audience were the folks like the Netflixes and the Airbnbs of the world who are cloud-born, that completely get how to take advantage of the model.
Right.
Whereas the second group, there was a poll given on the second day, and 40% of that group at Gartner Data Center wasn't even virtualized, let alone ready for the elasticity of public cloud for different workloads. So, and those folks at that second group, I mean, that represents Fortune 500 IT departments that still have a lot of cash sitting around, and could optimize the use of that cash a lot better and change their models so that instead of being a cost center, IT in a big corporation can be an enabler for the line of business teams to help those line of business teams very rapidly react to things going on in their marketplace. but the traditional IT spending in those big companies has been as a cost center. So it's a very different mindset that I don't think everybody's sort of grokked yet. But as they begin to, we're going to see more and more companies taking this stuff on.
Yeah, not to get too far off the subject, but I think it's interesting the Gartner crowd and at the Gartner conference and the Amazon event show. I mean, two different crowds, and I think it was a Gartner analyst who I think now works for OpenStack. He talked about how the OpenStack audience is more of a do-it-yourself, forward-thinking, semi-reckless in some cases, and whereas the folks at that Gartner show, traditional, starchy, classic enterprise IT crowd, deeper pockets, but they can't move as fast. At any rate, to get back to our tools discussion, Greg, I want to ask you what do you think hangs people up in terms of tools and getting deploying to the cloud the most when you talk to cloud customers?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so first of all, totally agree with everything that's already been said. And just to add on a little bit to what Pete said, I think that that statistic from the Gartner Data Center Conference is very poignant because, as you were just saying, that's the reality of the mass market of enterprise, right? I mean, that is kind of the majority, right? It's not the early adopters that are looking at doing things with, downloading OpenStack and trying to really kind of, be bleeding edge in terms of their adoption of the cloud. So I think Pete's comment on where to get started is key. I also think another way to look at that is also the unknown that our customers deal with in terms of what are those potential pitfalls, right? So they do a lot of due diligence and they think about architecting their applications in a way to take advantage of a new operating environment within whatever cloud provider they're planning to work with, but there's always this unknown of what am I missing, what am I forgetting, and when they go and they flip that switch and turn on that application, things break, things don't work as expected, the end user experience is suboptimal, it might turn out that they have a security vulnerability. So it's how can they, if they were able to go back in time and think about making that migration over again, what would be some of the things that they would plan for and consider as a part of that cloud stack that they missed the first time. And that's just a major concern that clearly we're going to see a lot more of in the years to come as that 40% that's not even virtualized starts to move their way towards the public cloud.
Yeah, I think that worry that you talked about has held people back even to this late date. I mean, they know the cloud is where they need to be. Obviously, they need to be virtualized, but what happens when you flip that switch and suddenly it doesn't work? Like that worry has actually held people back. But I would ask, Pete, why don't you take this one? I'm thinking about, what do you see as one of the biggest benefits of the cloud, and what is the corresponding tool that you need to get that benefit? If you're going to get the most out of that.
Well, I think the biggest benefit is certainly the elasticity of public cloud. That's the biggest benefit. And what comes to me a very, very close second is, and this is, you could argue this is true of any virtualized environment, but it becomes even more so in kind of a hybrid cloud environment. The ability to model your production environment in a test dev environment in a way that isn't super expensive. So I spent 20 years at HP and about 15 years of that in HP IT. I was running HP.com for a long part of that. And with any of our assets that we were running out on HP.com, there was a production environment, and then you got half that for your test environment, you got half that for your development environment. That was kind of the rule of thumb. And this was all on physical hardware, bare metal. And it was because you simply can't afford to have both your test and development environments in a bare metal hardware world be an exact mirror of production, because then you spend 3 times as much on hardware as maybe you think you do. Well, if you're virtualized, and especially if you're using public-private cloud, now you can suddenly, if you have the tools to help you do the modeling, you can model once and run wherever you want to. So you can run, let's say you have some data sensitivity and you want to run your production environment on your private cloud so that your data doesn't get outside your firewall. Well, that doesn't mean you can't take advantage of the elasticity of public cloud to run an exact model of your production environment, but on public cloud, because you're going to run that for a couple hours a week, if not a couple hours a month. So why have the physical hardware underneath the hood of your private cloud required to run those test dev workloads when you certainly don't need them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year. You only need them a couple hours, so you can take advantage of elasticity that way with test dev. There's certainly use cases for like public websites or even commerce sites where you take advantage of the elasticity within an application as load comes to your system. So it's the elasticity and the ability to mimic your production environment in test dev with far more precision, but with far less time, so that you can get better test cycles, but at far less cost.
Mm-hmm. Right. It's a serious cost-saving measure.
It absolutely is, and you get better quality as a result, because you're not deploying something to production that you couldn't have mimicked in the old days. Maybe you don't have all the load balancers in place in test dev that you do in production, and now all of a sudden something breaks because you didn't have the ability to mimic that in test dev the same way that you could in production. So that elasticity, combined with having the tool sets to help you deploy into those multiple environments in the exact same way. That's where you get the big benefit to what's going on in cloud today.
And Pete, just to add on to that, I totally agree. And I think the one piece you didn't mention, which is even more supporting that, is just kind of time to market, right? Thinking about the speed by which organizations can provision and deploy those resources is exponentially faster now, which supports the ability to really take advantage of those elastic on-demand computing resources. So
no,
really,
no 3-month lag time to get your hardware installed, right?
Exactly.
You have it in 10 minutes. You're absolutely right. I missed that one.
Sharon, what's your take on a really important cloud benefit that people need a certain tool to take advantage of? So I'm going to really zone in on that.
I think it's the agility and the freedom, right? If I'm listening to Greg and I'm listening to Pete, the agility that you get, the business agility, the operational agility, the financial agility, is the biggest benefit that push people to use cloud resources. Because when you look at the cloud vendors, or at cloud in general, right? Infinite capacity, yes. Self-serve, absolutely. With a portal, you can just get in your credit card and you're up and running for test, development, production. If you're, a tiny startup that just need to launch several servers, you're up and running in a few hours. So it's everything related to agility and freedom to operate. No more 3 months to get, a virtual instance up and running. That's what push companies to the cloud. However, when you think about agility and freedom, you also think about I wouldn't say the resistance, but the way how IT used to operate, used to plan their capacity, used to plan their their future applications that are up and running in the cloud. So you've seen, like 18 or 24 months ago, you've seen the resistance from IT to take critical applications and push them to the cloud. And today, when we talk to our clients, most of our clients are IT people that already embrace cloud and looking for ways to become much more agile in terms of provisioning and support the business growth.
That same phenomenon you talked about, the agility and being able to set up a cloud deployment with a credit card, has spawned this idea of shadow IT, where a certain division in a company just can't get the job done, and so they actually start, they hire their own compute capacity separate from the larger IT department. Some people complain about that. I'm sure certain things have gotten done because of that, which, although it's called shadow IT, it might actually have its own advantages.
Well, but to me, that very much speaks to the idea of IT not sort of changing its mindset, and I completely agree with Sharon that the agility part of that is really, really paramount. That IT is used to being funded by corporate taxes, essentially, right? At the beginning of the year, you figure out how much you think you're going to make in revenue. Some percentage of that, around 2%, is what IT gets funded for. It's a fixed cost throughout the rest of the year. And so it's IT's job to try to spend as little of that money as possible and be as responsible with that money as possible. But that agile development methodologies don't work that way. And if any of you guys happen to be at the GigaOM Structure last year, guys like the CIO of Revlon, like Kohl's. So it's not just Netflix and Airbnbs of the world. I mean, these are big companies that you don't traditionally think of as having big technology components. And while they still do have a cost center component, they've flipped the model the way that it's funded, such that they can control what clouds and what applications people use within the line of business teams within the Revlons and the Kohl's of the world. But they have chargebacks so that IT gets funded through the line of business teams and what project they have going on right now. In the old model, you had this annual funding cycle and you had these annual project suggestions that went on, and you had to, if you're a line of business team owner, you had to predict sometimes as much as 18 months in advance what kind of project or what kind of infrastructure you thought you would need. Whereas now, if you can, as Sharon's pointing out, if you can take advantage of the Agile model and change the way that IT gets funded, now all of a sudden you can be an enabler to your line of business teams instead of being that roadblock.
You know, when you talk to clients that works with cloud vendors, you know how public clouds pitch the benefit of a cloud, right? It's the agility, it's the ability of freedom to act, and I would actually challenge the term shadow IT. Maybe shadow IT does not exist anymore. Maybe shadow IT is the real IT of tomorrow or of today, and nothing is going to left inside. So maybe there is no shadow IT anymore.
I'm sure there's some CIOs out there who would probably disagree with that statement, but I like the thought.
Yeah.
Greg, what's your take? A key benefit and a tool that someone needs to take advantage of that benefit?
Sure. So, I guess I would look maybe to where things are moving to, and I think what's interesting in terms of one of the benefits that customers can expect moving forward is this ability to be able to leverage pieces of their application hosted or delivered from different cloud providers. And my view there and what we're seeing emerge here is the reality that if you take a snapshot, let's just call it infrastructure as a service, right? That piece of the cloud market today. If you take a snapshot of the current landscape of infrastructure as a service providers today, I'm not a betting man, but if I was, I would bet that's going to look very different in a year, 3 years, 5 years. And that's what's so exciting about the space, right? Is there's so much innovation and investment being made within the space now. So as an enterprise organization, I'm going to increasingly have the ability to think differently about where I place workloads and about where I deliver my applications from. So that's the benefit, right, is the fact that there's going to be continual innovation here, and there will be, I think, increasingly differentiated services built on top of infrastructure as a service to be industry-specific, use case-specific type offerings. And so the tool there, and I'm not going to plug any one vendor, but kind of to the point that Paul talked about in his opening, I think that the challenge of having this kind of rapidly evolving landscape of cloud services is how do you manage applications across these various hosting platforms. And so I think one of the key tools that folks are going to continue to rely on is looking at cloud management platforms and tools that allow them with a single pane of glass to have visibility into various virtual environments across their organization, both on-premise and in the cloud, and thinking about the ability to quickly provision those resources and deploy applications across those environments, and then thinking about doing things like not only being able to migrate applications across virtual environments, but actually being able to think about having VM interoperability, right? So you can do things like migrate across, a VMware to an OpenStack environment, and have kind of the application stack changes required to operate in those different environments adapt, so VM translation type capabilities. So that kind of generic cloud management platform category of tools, I think is going to be really exciting to watch in terms of how it evolves and allows customers to take advantage of what hopefully is going to be a whole lot of different cloud services brought to market in the years to come.
Yeah, I think that the idea of the single pane of glass you talked about is also the promise for the software-defined data center. So I think there's kind of this union going on between cloud and software-defined data center. They're going to merge if the promise of that single pane of glass, monitoring panel truly comes true. Paul, a key tool that a company needs if they're going to get some big benefit out of the cloud, what do they really need?
Sure. And, sort of in line with the theme of this discussion that we're having, cloud computing, there are a lot of benefits, and all the panelists have talked about some great benefits. And I think since there are many benefits, it sort of points to this idea that you need an entire toolkit of tools actually to take advantage. So I almost want to step back to that higher level and say, okay, you show up to a cloud service provider, an infrastructure as a service provider, and they're going to give you this nice elastic cloud that gives you resources on demand. You can use them when you need them, and return them when you don't. But to really flesh it out and to really get some of those additional benefits, I think you need a set of different things, this complete toolkit. And that would include things like getting your applications into a cloud and managing them and doing configuration and patch changes. It would also include a category around the area of economics. So making sure that you understand what you're spending, how you're spending it, whether you're doing so efficiently and economically. A third category would be related to the network, making sure that you're connecting your on-premises environment with the public cloud appropriately. Maybe there's a caching solution or performance management or traffic acceleration solution, but it's that whole category of the network. And then I'll just wrap up with a fourth one. It doesn't have to be what I would call a cloud brokerage solution, but I think there's several different areas that are starting to emerge where there's tools or management tools that sort of bring all this together and integrate it and allow you to look at your IT environment more holistically, look at the applications that you have running on different public clouds as well as applications that you have internally, and have it help you make decisions on which applications to place where, how to make the best economic decisions when you're placing your applications and so on. So I think it really is a toolkit.
Yeah, the cloud broker seems like that's a trend on its way up, and then the idea of the cloud exchange and the companies like Equinix that are sort of the big cloud connectors. It's sort of an interesting trend. I'd like to ask the four of you a question specific to your area. I don't think all four of you need to answer this, but I'd like to sort of zone in on your particular area. Pete, to focus on you for a second, how do companies decide what cloud runs their applications the best, or whether it's Amazon or whether it's Azure? How do they make the decision? Because the clouds really aren't apples-to-apples comparisons.
No, not only are they not apples to apples, as Greg said a minute ago, it's constantly changing. If you think about just what's happened in the last 6 months, right at about the time we had the last OpenStack Summit, we're about to have the next one here next week. Rackspace announced a new set of instance types based on Ivy Bridge processors. A month later, Amazon did the same thing. A couple weeks ago, Google drops prices. The next day, Amazon drops prices. Right. So this idea of price, first of all, price and performance are pretty lockstep in terms of most workloads have some component of both that help you define whatever best is in your mind. Some rely on throughput, some rely on just bare bones. How much does it cost to have me run this server? But it's usually some combination of those two. So we tend to think that that at Clicker that performance goes lockstep with price, and it's a key part of our tool set to help you run benchmarks of your applications very easily across multiple clouds, so that you can detect when that change happens and how big of a change is it. Is it a big enough change that would necessitate me moving a workload from one cloud to another? And using this benchmarking feature, you can even determine, I might not go all in on one public cloud even. I might find that one public cloud does, say, Hadoop queries faster than another cloud that does really well for high CPU, like image rendering, or maybe the third cloud does web applications better. Because these things are all architected differently, and they're still going on in this price war, and they still introduce all these new instance types. Whatever answer it is you come up with, what's the best cloud for my app, you're going to have a different answer for different apps. And whatever answer you come up with, it's going to change every 3 to 6 months. So we think it's pretty important to any cloud management platform like what we offer to not only allow the portability of deploying applications on multiple clouds and being able to migrate them easily between the clouds, but also to be able to run these tests so that you can detect when the landscape has changed enough that it warrants you making a change.
Sharon, to you, what is the impact of the cloud pricing war? I mean, we hear Amazon and Google having this fierce war. I think Amazon claims they've cut pricing 42 times in the last few years, so somehow they're keeping track, 38, 39, 40. I find that almost amazing. But What is the impact of this big race to the bottom that the cloud vendors are doing?
Well, I think I'm going to surprise you. I think that in the short term, there is a cost-saving impact. On the long term, there's no impact on clients.
No.
And I think I'm going to show you an example in a minute or so that actually proves this concept. Obviously, prices will continue to drop. Okay, they will go as low as the Moore's law. Okay, and I think that's going to be the probably the most significant tools that cloud vendors will use to increase adoption, at least in the very beginning, and raise prices later on. That's true. Google play a strong bet on price reduction of around 42% last month, and Amazon responded very, very quickly. Actually, Google did a very smart move by introducing sustained discounts that are much less complex than Amazon Web Services, which should increase the migration to Google Cloud. But getting back to my point, I think that in the long run, there will be no cost benefit because of this price reduction. And that's a result of what we call, and Paul and I has discussed it many times in the past, it's a result of what we call the Jevons paradox. The Jevons paradox is a paradox that says basically that when the price per unit goes down, the consumption goes up. Mm-hmm. It's taken from other markets, from the electricity or infrastructure markets. And what I would do now is I want to share with you an interesting slide. It's a real case study. I just need to make sure, how do I
screen share
my screen?
Well,
yeah, I'm going to do that as we speak.
Yeah.
So I'm sharing a screenshot now. I hope you guys.
At this point, we only see. Oh, there it is. So if you talk, it'll go up.
Okay. So the title of the slide is a case study: optimization increases cloud adoption. It's a real case study from probably one of the leading technology consultancy services in the world. They use the cloud for application development and testing. And I want to make a long story short, I want you to take a look at the graph. So you have the red line that shows the number of ECU hours. The number of ECU hours increases from around 85,000 to around 120,000 in 6 months. On the blue line, you see the cost per ECU hours. So you see that the price goes down and the cost per ECU hours actually dropped, but the consumption goes up.
People use it more.
Yeah, people are actually using it much more. So, and I think that's what the cloud vendors are trying to do. Eventually, they are trying to bring as much workloads as they can to their infrastructure and taking care of prices later. That's my view. And if you will take a look at it on the short term, customers will benefit from a low cost per ECU hour, but in the long run, they will use more the cloud. So I think it could be a win-win for both the vendors and the clients.
Well, probably the loser in that scenario is the smaller cloud vendor who wants to get on board, and the prices they can charge are so low that the barrier to entry to that market is just going to be too tough for them.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. And the big question would be what's going to happen with the secondary market, if you want, of the small cloud vendors that doesn't have a competitive advantage relatively to Google or Azure or Amazon Web Services, HP, IBM, and the others.
Right. Greg, what about cloud security? We talked about this a little bit. I mean, what should companies think in terms of cloud security, and what's a tool for that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm actually shocked that we're this far into the conversation, and this is the first time security's come up. It's usually one of the the top concerns and challenges that customers have, and it's an area that Akamai has been really laser focused on for the last couple of years. So there are really, we think, multiple approaches that organizations need to take when thinking about how to secure their applications that they're delivering either on-premise or from the cloud, and we kind of espouse this defense in depth approach. One of the unique things from an Akamai perspective that we're trying to help customers think more about is thinking outside of the confines of the data center itself, right? So a lot of organizations spend most of their time thinking about planning for and architecting the aspects of the application, including the security layer, but all those application layers that live within the four walls of a data center. And what is absent there is thinking about what happens when you flip the switch and turn this application on and go to deliver it out over the internet to your global users. So one of the things we've done is actually developed a security solution that allows organizations to identify and detect security threats out on the network before those threats ever get to the data center, which is a really interesting approach for folks to think about not only how do you extend that security perimeter out of the data center, but then also how do you think about the ability to deploy security solutions that are holistic across your application portfolio, so not tied to a physical box that lives within one cloud provider environment or one data center. So having a single security solution that can span across cloud providers. The other unique thing that the customers are telling us is really important to them, and one of the reasons that they're increasingly looking to Akamai when it comes to security, is the ability to have security solutions that instantly move with the application or workload when it moves, right? So thinking about having to actually go in and perform some aspect of the application move that takes the security solutions and does, a DNS record change or whatever it is to make sure that it works when they move that application to a different environment is concerning. Mistakes, right? There's an opportunity for there to be a miss or a mistake versus a solution that dynamically moves in real time with the workload. So I think there's a lot more innovation left to be made in the kind of cloud security space at large, but it's certainly an area that customers are increasingly looking to us, and we've had a lot of fun and a lot of success helping customers over the last few years.
Paul, in your world, what are some key metrics that a company can use to judge whether or not a cloud deployment is successful or not? How do they know that this is working for them or not?
Okay, that's a great question and a really broad topic. I'll start with maybe just a couple high-level thoughts and then give some specifics that are hopefully a little bit more pragmatic. But at the high level, I think it's important to stop and understand what are the benefits of cloud, and we talked about those pretty well, I think. But then when you define whatever project you have, whether it's to move a new set of applications to the cloud or what have you, think about those same benefits again. In other words, you're moving to the cloud to achieve some benefits, whether it's agility or elasticity or performance or cost savings, whatever it may be. So you want to set up some metrics that hit all those elements, all those benefits that you're trying to get, and also make sure the metrics are a little broader so that you can see if you've broken anything in the process. So, for instance, one of the big benefits of cloud is agility, and part of agility, of course, is speed. So a great metric there would be, so how quickly can you now provision infrastructure? How quickly can you now provision middleware and the application stacks that go with it? So you can start at those high-level benefits for cloud in general, and also the high-level objectives that you're aiming for in your projects, and then drill those down into really specific measurements. And again, I mentioned you want to see if you broke anything, for instance. So you want to see not only how much more quickly you deploy an application, but you might also want to check to see how much you're spending on application management tools. Did you have to buy a whole another set of tools, or do you have a tool that works in both environments? So I think that's kind of the high level and top down view both together.
Okay. Thanks for combining them.
Yeah.
Hey, it's a lot of good stuff. I'd like to kind of bring us home with a question that looks to the future. If you look at the tool set that you yourself spend the most time dealing with, where are we going, say 1 to 3, 5 years ahead? Not that anyone thinks 5 years ahead in cloud computing, I don't think, but where are we going in the future for your particular tool? Sharon, what's your take on that?
Probably autopilot for your cloud.
Aha,
I would
autopilot for your cloud.
Yeah, why not? I would envision a scenario when, let's say, a clicker customer will be able to launch his deployment, put a set of criteria, thresholds, and let the application maintain itself, scale in and scale up automatically, based on, for instance, business growth. So envision a scenario when your monitoring solutions are well connected with your Google Analytics and your revenue management software that may predict growth in terms of user hits into your website, that will know how to upscale it automatically before it actually happens. I don't think we are far away from it. There is a lot of work needs to be done in order to make it happen, specifically maturity of clients, but it could happen, definitely.
Well, you're basically talking about automated application management, right?
I would say automated infrastructure management. Not quite sure that on the application level yet, but specifically for infrastructure, yes.
Yeah, I could see that one coming, certainly. Greg, your take on where we're going with tools, say 1 to 3, even 5 years out?
So I totally agree with what Sharon said, and just to kind of add another unique view on that, I think this concept of federation becoming more of a reality, and so there being more interoperability between different cloud providers' platforms is something that customers are asking for. This isn't necessarily something that cloud providers themselves are wanting to do, because clearly there's an incentive to try to keep customers within their confines of their environment, but customers want that interoperability. So thinking about industry standards or tools that sit on top of and are interoperable across multiple cloud platforms, and then allow for interoperability and more ease of migration of workloads and applications across various cloud providers, that's certainly something that customers are asking for, and I think will drive a lot more adoption, because there is a bit of concern that customers have around what happens if the provider or the partner that I work with is no longer around in a few years, or business dynamics change and I want to move, but I've made so much investment in architecting my application in a certain way that it's not really pragmatic for me to move it. And so thinking about tools that make it easier for organizations to have that flexibility to move and leverage resources from different cloud providers will hopefully be something we'll see play out in the years to come.
The magic word is platform agnostic. I think I hear a lot about that one, definitely.
Yep.
Pete, the future of the future of tools as you see it, where are we going?
Sure, I agree with the interoperability that Greg was just talking about. I disagree with how that's going to happen. I think, having worked for 2 infrastructure as a service companies, I can tell you that there's pretty big pressure to differentiate those platforms. And while as someone whose engineering team at Clicker spends a lot of time dealing with different cloud APIs, there's nothing my CTO would love more than for everybody to adopt the OpenStack API. But Google's never going to do that, and Amazon's never going to do that, and our friends at Microsoft are never going to do that as well. So there's going to be a limit to the kind of interoperability that the vendors themselves offer. But this is where the cloud management platforms, like what we do at Clicker, can insulate that from the majority of the world. So we'll deal with interactivity by allowing you to, in our case, describe your infrastructure needs using this application profile concept that we have, and we'll interpret that for you, and we'll provide that interoperability for you. And where that's going to take us, I think, longer term, I think to Sharon's point, is some automation. So And I'll go there with the applications. I'll say, I see in 3 to 5 years you can use a tool like what we do to, here's my application and here's some parameters that I want you to consider, and you just move it for me. Run the benchmark.
The variables.
Run the benchmark every month for me, and when the benchmark hits certain criteria, yeah, I've already written the migration scripts. Just go do it for me. And it could be that a line of business owner doesn't know where his blog's running and doesn't care, because the underlying management platform is just taking care of that for him or her and moving that around based on criteria that they've defined. And it might not even be criteria that you're measuring. I think where the next set of this might go is it's not even criteria you're measuring on your systems themselves, but social media has enough data out there to mine that, based on what you're seeing and out in social media and what your application does and what your application's audience is, I think we're going to see a point where we're going to be able to have an application predict when load will come to it based on what it sees out in the global social media space. I mean, you can think about, there's things that are predictable, like I'm a big National Football League fan, and the NFL draft is Thursday. So if you're somebody who's running a website or a blog or something that is related to the NFL draft, that's predictable. You know when that's going to happen. Well, you don't know when a high-profile player will get busted on a DUI, but
right.
I think we're going to see in the next 5 years the ability to get that predictability out there by monitoring social media, and then if that has an impact on my site, in this NFL example, I know if a player gets busted for something, or something out of band that's not predictable happens, that the likelihood I'm going to have an increase in traffic might go up based on what my topics are, and therefore horizontally auto-scale on my cloud of choice based on the prediction of what's happening out in the real world.
Paul, your take, the future of the cloud. I know all the research firms say the spending is going to go up. The last figure I think I heard is 23% a year, but through like 2020. But what about the technology itself? Where are we headed in terms of the tool set?
Okay, well, there's a few things I think, and Greg and Pete both illustrated the importance of, well, the fact that people are using multiple clouds and they want some type of interoperability. What that means maybe depends on your scenario. Some people want to be able to move applications from one cloud to another. Some people want to be able to write a brand new application that runs on one cloud or another. So there's a whole theme there that I think is really important, and it's kind of the continued evolution of management tools to support multiple cloud environments. So that'd be number one for me. And I've got two more. The second one would be to also extend tools so that they support not only the multiple public clouds, but also to support on-premises IT environments, whether they're private clouds or whatever. And I say that because the majority of IT is still in-house now. Even though it is massive growth, we're going to continue to see a lot of movement to the public cloud. But I think that's the second factor these tools need to consider, is that they need to consider on-premises support as well as public cloud. And then I think the third one that comes to mind is there's going to be kind of this growing battle where you've got some large infrastructure as a service providers like the Amazons that are investing a lot in their own tools, and they're trying to bring some of these tools on board and have them just part of their offering. Or maybe they're charging for that additional management capability as a service, but I think that's something to watch. Other cloud providers are going to look to vendors and go pick best-of-breed management tools and integrate with those. So those are the three that I see.
In other words, the tool providers will get sucked into the large monolithic cloud providers.
I think in various forms. I think some of the large monolithic ones will build their own tools to compete, and many of the others will align themselves with best-of-breed solutions, the likes of Cloudin and Clicker, and work closely with them to make sure that they're giving their customers everything they need and competing against the big boys.
Excellent. I thank the four of you for your expertise. I'll keep you posted. I'll send you a link, and we can all happily tweet it. Thanks a lot for talking with us today.
Thanks, James.
Thanks, James.
Thank you.
Take care, guys.